The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Equipment Theft Prevention Bill, second reading.
Now.
Greg Smith.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that the bill be now read a second time. And before I begin, whilst I have no direct or technical interest to declare, I should bring the House's attention, for the sake of transparency, to the fact that my in-laws are farmers. We have agricultural equipment within the family, including quad bikes. Madam Deputy Speaker, fighting crime has been a priority for me throughout my whole political career. I spent 8 years as a councillor in a London borough some moons ago, where I was the portfolio holder for community safety, working closely with the police, where in that borough we reduced crime by a quarter. And it showed me that sometimes simple ideas can make a huge difference to people's lives, to reducing their chances of being a victim of crime, to deterring criminals from committing offences in the first place. Now, this bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, has been on something of a winding road, from the base ideas that formed it to the idea to shut down resale of stolen power tools on online platforms that formed my 2021 10-minute rule bill, an idea that was born on a community Facebook forum in the town of Buckingham in my constituency. And the bill has been on this, as I say, long winding road through an extensive negotiation with industry, insurers, the police, representative bodies like the National Farmers Union, the CLA, the Countryside Alliance, and others, plus, of course, the government, to get to the plan that we have today. A plan that is a framework that starts with a focus on combating thefts of equipment stolen far too often across rural communities, but with the provisions, with the framework being in the bill for that legislation to be expanded, having proven the concept works on quads and ATVs and side-by-sides, so much to other agricultural equipment like tractor GPS units and way beyond. And I sincerely hope that once we have proved the concept of this bill, that expansion can take place, not just to further agricultural equipment, but to other equipment in other trades and industries. Now, in over 40 years ago, a significant change took place in UK farming. It transformed the way that many farmers operate. The piece of machinery that precipitated this transformation has now become as synonymous, particularly with sheep farming, as the sheepdog itself. This revolution in farming methods was, of course, brought about by the introduction of ATVs, which were originally three-wheel motorcycles, but are now most commonly four-wheel quad bikes. By allowing farmers to reach significantly larger geographical areas and previously impenetrable rough terrain, their impact on farming has been considerable, and they are now a crucial element of livestock farming. However, the versatility of ATVs has meant that they have also become an essential piece of machinery in moorland management, urban parks, beaches, even to spray weeds and clear snow off our streets in urban and rural environments alike. These machines also play fundamental roles in our military, emergency services, mountain rescue teams across the country, carrying out essential functions. These machines are not designed for fun, although, of course, there are leisure uses for them too. But like most other motorcycles or off-road vehicles, they really are workhorses for so many. On many farms, particularly around lambing time, they are in near constant use. They not only lighten the load of day-to-day activities, they also play an essential role in ensuring the well-being and protection of livestock, which is fundamental to the livelihood of so many farmers, land managers, and their families. Without ATVs, without all-terrain vehicles, many farms would simply not be able to meet the demands of caring for the livestock over large geographic areas, which would have previously necessitated the employment of far larger numbers of people at a greater cost to the farmer and to the viability of the farm. In fact, they are so integral to contemporary farming businesses that many farms choose to operate multiple ATVs because being left without a machine in the event of a breakdown or theft is unthinkable.
Would my honourable friend give way? I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I wonder if he would agree with me that this is an excellent bill to help support farming and farming communities at this time, and I would congratulate the member for Buckingham on such a bill bringing forward.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for what was probably quite an easy intervention, in that I am happy to agree with her that I think this bill will make a huge difference to farmers and indeed all businesses that use quad bikes as part of their day-to-day operations. But there is a difficult truth, which is why this bill is before us today, which is why I felt it's so important to bring it in front of the House, that the universal trend for all-terrain vehicle thefts in our country, in the United Kingdom, has been between 800 and 1,100 thefts per year for the last decade in each of those years. And indeed, I was informed only this morning that a search on the police national computer shows that we are already up to 800 such reported thefts this year alone. So the trend is not declining. Now, in the 43 years since their introduction, the technology on ATVs has developed significantly, from the early three-wheel models, which had only a very basic handlebar controls and had to be kick-started. Modern machines are almost unrecognisable from that. Today's ATVs are much more advanced and incorporate features such as four-wheel drive, tank tracks, cabs, heaters, winches, power steering, electric start buttons, LED lights. Modern ATVs are, in short, Madam Deputy Speaker, infinitely more sophisticated than their predecessors, and this is perhaps appropriate given that they now have a market value of between £7,000 and £20,000 each.
I'm grateful to him for giving way. He's run through a list of advances that now we see on ATVs. Can he tell the House why manufacturers have not added to that list by fitting immobilisers without the need for this legislation?
Well, Madam Speaker, I'm grateful for that intervention. It is almost as if my right honourable friend had read my mind, because the very next part of my speech is to say that despite all of those advances in everything else that is offered on modern ATVs, there has not been that development in the safety features that prevent theft, in the security features, in things like immobilisers, very basic security features that it is almost unfathomable to understand, given that most of the manufacturers of quads and ATVs also tend to make other equipment, sometimes motorcycles, sometimes construction equipment, that is fitted with immobilisers and other security equipment. And it's striking to me, and has been somewhat surprising the more I have researched it, that these security features that are being rolled out have been so slow to the extent that some leading manufacturers have used the very same basic key system for 35 years.
Of course, thank you, Madam Deputy. Of course, it's easy to say that the best piece of security advice that farmers and ATV owners can have is to take the key out. But the point he's making in relation to the keys to these vehicles is that, well, it certainly was the case when I was farming, Madam Deputy Speaker. Every key for every vehicle seemed to fit every vehicle. So when I went home at the end of the day, I'd take my key home, and it didn't matter what tractor I was driving the next morning because I knew the key would fit.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that intervention. He is quite right, and indeed, on a lot of the quad bikes, a lot of the ATVs that are out there, the systems, the ignition systems are so basic that in some cases you don't even need the key. You could just start them with a simple screwdriver or other piece of flat metal, and that is something that really should disturb us, and we should shine a spotlight on why it is that these pieces of equipment are startable in such a way. I'd like to give way.
And I shall declare my interest. Obviously, I live on the Grundy family farm, so whilst we do not have an ATV, this is obviously of interest to my family and indeed my wider family. But would my honourable friend not agree that these issues, in many ways, make farms and other rural businesses more vulnerable than others, and that is why legislation such as this is so necessary?
I think he's hit the nail on the head that we have come to the point with the scale of theft of quad bikes, ATVs, side-by-sides, that this legislation is simply now necessary. With those numbers, 800 to 1,100 per year stolen, something has to give farmers, to give land managers, to give those that use quad bikes in their businesses, greater security to know that when they lock it up in the barn or wherever they keep it at night, they have a greater chance of it still being there the next morning. This legislation, Madam Deputy Speaker, is no magic bullet. It will not simply end the theft of all quad bikes and ATVs, but it does bring practical measures, immobilisers, forensic marking, which I will come on to in a moment, a greater chance to ensure that those pieces of equipment, that machinery, remains with its owner, and that we have shut down the incentives, if you like, for the would-be thieves to steal them.
Thank you. And the frustrating thing is, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the technology is here. So millions of dollars worth of John Deere machinery that was stolen from a dealership in Ukraine by Russian Federation forces was subsequently shut down remotely by John Deere. And will he join me in commending John Deere on the use of the technology to stop that theft of agricultural equipment by the Russian state?
Grateful to that intervention. I absolutely join my honourable friend in commending John Deere and all manufacturers that are putting the effort into R&D, into research, into providing products, particularly for the higher end value pieces of agricultural machinery, the tractors, the combines, the sprayers, that equipment can be fitted with remote control that can shut down a piece of equipment, that can stop it being used. This bill is very much focused on the smaller agricultural equipment at the moment, but there is no reason why we should stop at the provisions of this bill, and the more that industry itself can develop those future technologies where equipment, just like our mobile phones or iPads or whatever they might be, can be remotely wiped and turned off, and if someone steals them, they can't be used or the data extracted from them. There is no reason why equipment that is used on farms, on land, can't be treated similarly. But to get back to the central point, Madam Deputy Speaker, when stolen, there is a whole nightmare, if you like, for the police, for law enforcement, for those trying to track the stolen property, return it to its rightful owner at the moment, because when the police are called to track down, apprehend a suspect that's stolen something from a farm, be it a quad bike or other agricultural equipment, it really is a race against time. And these items are also light, quads, ATVs. They are very easily transportable. Within hours, thieves can have these vehicles strapped to the back of trailers, towed hundreds of miles from their owners, sometimes heading to seaports, where they can be transported to and through any number of countries, by which point it is simply too late for either the police or the owner to recover that vehicle, leaving the farmer or the landowner with a hefty bill for replacing the whole thing, and critically, the productivity loss in no longer having access to such a vital piece of machinery for their business. And then on the other side of that very same coin, Madam Deputy Speaker, shipping delays and the effects of the COVID pandemic and other global factors are contributing to a rise in demand for both new and second-hand farm machinery. And as waiting lists grow and market values soar, I'm afraid to say thieves are seeing quads and ATVs as easily portable, hot-ticket items.
Would you not further agree that this plague of thefts, due to the ease of the ability to make such thefts, has a considerable impact on insurance for farmers and other rural businesses, which obviously, given the current financial circumstances, makes it very difficult for the more marginal farms to continue?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend, Madam Deputy Speaker, in that I've worked very closely with particularly NFU Mutual in the preparation of this bill, and it is quite clear to me that if the provisions of this bill are adopted, if this bill becomes an act, having new quads ATVs, both immobilised and fitted with forensic marking, should in theory, I mean the market will always dictate this, but should in theory massively bring insurance premiums down so that any slight increase in the cost of the machine to fit the immobiliser, to install the forensic marking equipment, should be far more than offset by the reduction in the insurance premium.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way once more. I wonder if he would agree with me that at the moment the lack of security and safety measures here is almost a criminal waste of police time, because they still have to deal with the crime and try and identify the perpetrators and so on, and yet they're not being helped by the manufacturer of the product.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I absolutely agree with my honourable friend's analysis there, in that the police are having to spend an inordinate amount of time simply trying, if they have found a piece of stolen equipment, a stolen quad bike, in trying to identify it. It is not uncommon for various serial numbers or chassis numbers to be ground off, making them almost unidentifiable as to where they came from, where they were originally manufactured, who they have been stolen off or indeed bought by. And therefore, some of the provisions I will outline later in my speech will go some way to demonstrating how particularly forensic marking will massively cut down the demand on police time, enabling our fantastic police officers across the whole country to more readily identify stolen property and return it to its rightful owners, as well as prosecuting the criminals who have stolen it in the first place. I will give away one last time, then I'm going to make some progress.
Yes. Further to the point made by my honourable friend for Loughborough, is it not correct that, further to the issues we've discussed with the police, that many police forces are simply ill-equipped to deal with rural crime, making it even more difficult to deal with these issues once such thefts have taken place?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My honourable friend makes a good and valid point. I think there are some police forces around the country who have put in place very robust, in my own home police force area, Thames Valley, there is a new rural crime task force very much focused on these issues, on ensuring officers do have the training to understand all forms of rural crime, you know, from hair coursing to particular elements of agricultural machinery that possibly, if you've never worked on a farm or lived in a rural community, you don't necessarily get immediately what it is on site. And I think the establishment of rural crime units within different police forces is a very welcome addition to the response to rural crime. That is something that does need to be rolled out across the whole country. You know, pretty much everywhere has a rural part to it, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I think the more that we can ensure that of the additional 20,000 officers this government is recruiting and providing to our police forces, that some of that resource does indeed go into fighting rural crime.
One more time, perhaps.
As my honourable friend is my constituent, I will give way to him one last time.
He's very generous, and I know he wants to make progress, but perhaps he will join me in commending the Rural Crime Task Force in Thames Valley Police, who have made fantastic progress in tackling rural crime, not just theft of farm machinery, of which a significant amount of farm machinery was recovered, stolen from Thames Valley this year, but also in things like hair coursing, which is such a blight and such a pain for farmers. Again, one of those complete time hoovers that just sucks up time and attention on farms where we should be focusing on productivity.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I absolutely agree with my honourable friend on that. Thames Valley covers both my constituency and my honourable friends, and as I said a few moments ago, they are making great strides to tackle rural crime under the wonderful leadership of Inspector Stuart Hutchinson, the mighty Hutch, who is doing incredible work to ensure that those that wish to commit crimes in rural Buckinghamshire and indeed rural Milton Keynes are held to account, are apprehended, are prosecuted, and stolen equipment returned to their rightful owners.
Will you give way to another
I really do wish to make some progress, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Will you give way to another grade?
I will give way to my right honourable friend in a few moments once I've made just a little bit more progress. This bill will tackle the problems that we've just outlined head on. As I alluded to in response to a number of interventions, it mandates the fitting of forensic markings at source, which feeds into a national database that is accessible to all police forces across the country, making the quads, the ATVs, the side-by-sides that are fitted with this forensic marking, of which there are many manufacturers, there are many different standards, there are many options out there, making those bits of equipment almost as unique as our own DNA, making them entirely traceable, making them identifiable to the police officers who have the scanning equipment to be able to read and to understand that forensic marking. This will streamline, Madam Deputy Speaker, the ability for each force involved to work with the same resources simultaneously, massively increasing the opportunity to apprehend the suspect, identify and return the stolen machine to its owner. Let me now turn to the other key change this bill makes. Again, alluded to in answer to some of the interventions earlier, mandating the fitting of an immobiliser. For over 20 years now, immobilisers have been mandatory for all new passenger cars sold in the United Kingdom, in fact since October 1998. I would dare to say none of us in this place, Madam Deputy Speaker, or indeed outside this place, can imagine buying a car, a truck or a van without an immobiliser. And for good reason. They are fundamental in preventing vehicle theft. Without the ignition system talking to the engine, there is simply no way that a car can be operated under its own power. And yet, despite the many functions of both quad bikes and ATVs, this rule does not currently apply to either. I put it to the House that that is simply preposterous. Something as simple and easy to fit as an immobiliser is simply a no-brainer for such essential and valuable assets to our farmers. And this is not an isolated problem. Farms of all types across the United Kingdom are impacted by vehicle theft, as are the surrounding communities. These are often small communities where everyone knows each other. Farms are the beating heart of rural life, and news of any and all threats they face spreads quickly, and a sense of fear, of panic sets in for residents and businesses in the whole area. It is fair to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that rural communities suffered immeasurably during and since the pandemic. Rural businesses teetered on the edge throughout COVID, and they continue to feel the effects from that extremely difficult period. When combined with the theft of farm vehicles and equipment, this situation is one that cannot be ignored and must be taken seriously. As the chairman of NFU Mutual, Jim McLaren, has made clear, and I quote, "With diesel and fertiliser prices soaring and the cost of living crisis biting, it looks likely that we will see rural crime rise in the coming months." Jim goes on to say, "Current supply chain shortages mean farmers who suffer a theft are facing delays sourcing replacement equipment, which may be vital to carrying out their essential farm work. We are in a race against time to stop farms and farmers facing not only a rise in rural crime, but also in dealing with the impact of those crimes, potentially and needlessly prolonging the effects on their business for months or even years to come. Farmers deserve as much as anyone else to operate in a safe and secure environment. That means getting ahead of the criminal gangs who are perpetrating thefts of these vehicles, and this bill, I hope, provides a solid foundation through which to pursue them. The Countryside Alliance, with whom I have worked closely on this bill as well, revealed through their 2021 Rural Crime Survey that 95% of respondents believed that crime in their local community had become significant over the preceding 12 months. 70% believed that there had been an increase in the local crime rate. And it is clear how this worrying trend is manifesting itself, with 43% of respondents reported having a crime committed against them over that period, and 32% of respondents saying that this took the form of agricultural machinery theft. When we look across the whole country, I can understand how some might say that in the grand scheme of things, those numbers are not so high, but I say they are high, they are too high, and they need to be tackled, because behind every victim of crime, and more specifically every theft, therein lies a business and a family that is dependent on that enterprise for their own financial security. A business that can no longer function as it should, because that piece of equipment, whether it be large or small, is likely gone forever, as it can't be tracked or retrieved in good time. Digging deeper into the feedback from rural communities reveals the urgent need for measures specified in this bill. Looking back to that same rural crime survey, 53% of respondents said that they had installed crime prevention measures in the last 12 months due to an increased fear of crime and directly being victims of crime. These measures included security lighting, industrial barn doors, securing their keys, and installing CCTV systems, which each come at a very great cost to the farmers, to those businesses. And the measures that we're seeing across farms, across rural communities, across our entire country, these measures are more typical, Madam Deputy Speaker, of an industrial estate in a built-up area rather than in an urban setting.
Will my honourable friend now give way? I'm obliged to him for giving way, but just going back to his earlier comments about rural crime, is it not the case that it is still, sadly, the situation that suspects are 25% more likely to be arrested for crimes committed in urban areas than those committed in the countryside?
My right honourable friend makes a very valid point, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it is something that I think the Rural Crime Task Force in my own police force area, Thames Valley, and the rural crime units in other police forces are taking seriously, are trying to get on top of. The statistics do speak for themselves, Madam Deputy Speaker, and this bill is a part of the jigsaw puzzle in starting to tackle rural crime and ensuring that actually our police forces, where they are covering rural areas, have the powers, have the facilities and the equipment themselves in terms of the scanning equipment for forensic marking to be able to identify stolen equipment and return it to its rightful owners. I think it is with these powers that our police forces can have greater confidence, that our police officers can have greater confidence to be able to get on top of rural crime, to identify stolen equipment, to identify who has stolen that equipment, and to bring them to justice. So this bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said earlier, is no magic bullet. It won't end rural crime overnight, but it does bring significant duties to the manufacturers and to those that sell this equipment to help lift the burden that we are seeing farmers face in terms of installing all of that expensive security equipment I just listed, and essentially having to turn their premises, the beating heart of the countryside, effectively into exclusion zones. I'm not saying that other security equipment isn't needed. Of course it is. Every little bit helps. But there is something that we have to acknowledge as a country, that where farms are being turned into these mini fortresses, that is not actually befitting the countryside, and we need to take other measures too. Once more.
Thank you. I think it's an important point, Madam Deputy Speaker, because, and I hope he'll agree with me on this, that the people who are not from rural communities need to understand how food is produced. If we are going to transition to be much more sustainable as a nation, as to how we produce and grow and sell our food, people, the public, need to see the process, and turning farms into fortresses is counter to that. Perhaps he'll agree with me that we need more accessibility on farms and less security in terms of getting people on there.
I'm grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker, to my honourable friend. He and I both share a passion for farming and ensuring that farming is as visible and accessible to everyone in our country. That point he makes about people understanding how food is produced, that the chicken doesn't by magic get into the plastic box on the shelves of the supermarket, and that the cereal doesn't make itself in a factory, it had to be grown somewhere first, is very important. He almost tempts me to get into the amendment I've got down for the Levelling Up Bill, but I think we'll leave that for when it comes back at report stage. I hear my honourable friend in the whip's position encouraging me to do that. So back to the subject at hand, Madam Deputy Speaker. By pre-fitting quad bikes and ATVs with the means necessary to both prevent them being stolen and to effectively track any that do get stolen, a huge weight will be lifted off the shoulders of our hard-working farmers. The threat is well documented, and it is more widespread and organised than most think. We're not necessarily talking about a couple of opportunists who are bored and looking for something to fill their time. Those that are stealing this equipment are predominantly organised criminal syndicates who are intent on profiteering off high-value theft. Let me give the House an example, Madam Deputy Speaker. A prominent recent case of agricultural equipment theft saw the successful prosecution of 2 men for conspiring to steal agricultural global positioning systems and other technical equipment valued at approximately £380,000 from agricultural vehicles at 13 farms and estates across the county of Essex between the 28th of September and the 27th of October 2021. Following investigations by Essex Police, they were convicted and sentenced to a total of 6 years and 10 months in prison. This bill will prevent the need to pursue this time-consuming and extremely costly legal process again by ensuring that the quads and the ATVs and potentially further equipment in due time through secondary legislation either cannot be stolen in the first place or through forensic marking, making items less attractive to the would-be thieves. That case took Essex Police a considerable amount of time, a lot of investigation, probably hundreds of hours, if not thousands of hours of police time to get to that point, to get that fantastic prosecution. This bill is about shortcutting that for our police and ensuring that they can get the result and to get justice in much faster time. As was referenced by my honourable friend for Milton Keynes North, my own local force and his, Thames Valley Police, reported recently that officers from their groundbreaking rural crime task force that I referenced earlier, which has only been in operation since April this year, have recovered more than 100 items totalling over £1 million worth of machinery, tools and equipment, with 25% of those theft related. Investigations resulting in a positive outcome for the victim. This is encouraging. It is a great start, but we need to go much further and expand this type of excellent work beyond the individual forces. I'm pleased to say that there is already strong engagement on this from both rural representative groups and local law enforcement, but we need to go further by tackling the problem at source. A good example of the behind-the-scenes work already being done to tackle this type of rural crime is NFU Mutual's own approach, which is based on close coordination with national and local police forces, as well as with the manufacturing sector. The dedicated Agricultural Vehicle Theft Unit at the National Vehicle Crime Intelligence Service saw £2.6 million worth of stolen machinery recovered in 2021, up from £2.3 million in 2020. Specific measures, such as the funding of Caesar forensic markings for 200 quads in Northern Ireland through working with Data Tag and the Police Service of Northern Ireland, has contributed to a drop of nearly 20% in the cost of dealing with rural theft in Northern Ireland. Of course, there are other forensic marking products and brands available. We need, Madam Deputy Speaker, to lock in these reductions such as seen through that project in Northern Ireland for the whole of our United Kingdom, for every farm possible, because they each suffer from the same threat. That is what this bill does. It provides the groundwork for bringing down rates of theft and reducing the overall threat of theft. Tackling the problem at source, building on the prevention measures already in place. And the cost of not doing so is clear. The CLA estimates that the average financial impact per rural crime equates to £4,800 to the victim, a figure which is increasing each day as supply chain costs and overheads continue to rise. The value of quad bike and ATV theft alone that was reported to NFU Mutual in 2021 was £2.2 million, with almost half of those reports being received between September and December. This demonstrates the extremely challenging circumstances we're dealing with and how much is at stake for farmers as the weather begins to turn. And for the 10.3 million people who live in the countryside, this hits right at the heart of everyday life. Rural crime simply cannot just sit alongside urban crime, as the CLA make clear. Difficulties in tracking criminals over such vast swathes of countryside mean that local police forces are always faced with an uphill battle. By having to spread resources over a much larger geographical area compared to their more urban counterparts, criminals already have a head start. So
my honourable friend for giving way. I think the point that he is making here is absolutely vital. In my own constituency of Clwyd South, I live close to the Thames Valley, where there's been a lot of problems of this nature, and often the thieves are actually coming from outside the constituency. So they're not coming from a rural area, they may be coming, in my case, from Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham, and therefore they're not known to the police and so on, which makes apprehending the criminals all the more difficult. So I would strongly support everything that he's saying in his speech at the moment.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend's support for this bill, and I agree with him that when it comes to apprehending criminals, when it comes to local knowledge, so much of this acquisitive crime, the evidence shows, is committed by criminals who are not local to the area in which they are committing the crime. They are passing through, if you like, in a very organised criminal gang way, and that is something that adds to the pressures on our police to be able to apprehend them. Close collaboration between communities and the police is also key, though, to tackling theft, as demonstrated by the Agricultural and Construction Equipment Police Unit, which since April last year has been central to tackling cross-border organised crime that my honourable friend rightly highlighted. Its guiding principle is one that goes right to the heart of this bill, that cross-industry cooperation is crucial for crime prevention, and that fundamentally prevention is better than the cure. Like the importance of these vehicles to farmers themselves, intelligence sharing is essential for tackling theft, and that's what this bill enables. Dealerships would be required by law to submit details of a vehicle's appearance, registration and location of its forensic markings to a central database that is accessible to all police forces right across our United Kingdom, no matter their size or scope. This would in turn better enable officers from different forces to work together within dedicated units and apprehend the assailant in an effective and timely manner. And not only is this an essential tool for police forces today, but also for tomorrow and far into the future as the technology evolves and is developed further. The use of a national database for training new officers is crucial, Madam Deputy Speaker, for making the most of this opportunity. Because by using and sharing data, forces can pinpoint hotspots where theft is particularly prevalent and respond accordingly in a coordinated way, knowing their officers are properly trained to use and to interpret those information systems. This is essential to beat the ever-changing tactics that these criminal gangs use to pursue what is becoming an increasingly sophisticated operation. Again, they have the upper hand in more rural areas. Without the same level of CCTV and ANPR systems in place, it can be incredibly difficult to track stolen vehicles moving through rural areas, especially under the cover of darkness. And that's why the behind-the-scenes work that's already being rolled out not only needs accelerating, but formalising. And that, Madam Deputy Speaker, is what this bill does. Before I conclude, I would like to just place on record some particular thanks to everyone that has worked with me and my team on this bill, above all, but not certainly limited to, David Exwood and his whole team at the National Farmers Union, to everyone at NFU Mutual, which deals with this issue day in and day out for its thousands of members and consumers across the UK. Likewise, this bill would not exist without the vast insight, the knowledge and the experience of Superintendent Andy Huddleston, whose hard work and determination as the Rural Crime Coordinator at the National Police Chiefs Council has made this bill possible. I'd also like to thank the many other industry-led organisations which have contributed to the preparation and research for this bill, including the CLA, the Countryside Alliance, the Construction Equipment Association and the Agricultural Equipment Association, amongst others, and for his huge dedication and hard work to supporting me on this bill, my senior parliamentary assistant, Ian Kelly. It would also be remiss of me, Madam Deputy Speaker, not to thank the succession of ministers that I have negotiated with since I came out of the ballot earlier this year, not least my right honourable friend on the Treasury bench at the moment, who, alongside his hard-working and dedicated officials, has made himself and them available to me frequently throughout the drafting and production of this bill, which I hope will lead to the government's full support for the bill as we pass through Parliament. So with this bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, it will allow my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary and future Home Secretaries, to expand the bill's scope when necessary, that we can ensure that rural communities will remain protected as the threat evolves and changes. The demand is still there for globalised criminal networks of stolen equipment and machinery, and we must continue working to break that link and to shut it down at source. That means identifying and monitoring other such industries that are vulnerable to having similar types of valuable assets stolen at large. There is just as much a threat to the construction industry and to other trades when considering the vast amount of specialist equipment and vehicles found everywhere, from driveways to building sites, containing everything from power tools to excavators, all of which is at risk of being stolen. This will require a cross-department effort, just as it requires a cross-border and cross-community approach to tackle on the ground. But we have a starting point, and we simply cannot lose this opportunity, Madam Deputy Speaker, to build a network that will ultimately enhance safety and security for countless communities, businesses, farmers across our country. I trust that these calls for a strengthened approach to tackling the scourge of rural crime won't have gone unheard. And I would urge my right honourable friend, the Minister, to keep monitoring this policy area closely and to continue to work with both the police and the farming community. This bill can make a difference to rural crime, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I commend it to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time.